Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another pre-recorded lesson video. Um, if you did not watch the video from 324, highly recommend that you do that. If you don't, I'll review like a little bit of what we went over yesterday, but it was quite a bit because we started a new book. Remember, it's the start of a new 9 weeks, so it's just going to be a lot of information in that video, right? And yes, you heard correctly, only 9 weeks left of this school year. Time is flying by. STAR testing is almost here. Grades are almost finalized for the year. So make sure that, you're focused and you're ready to finish strong, right? We did start a new book. It is called Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. I cannot find a version of this online like I did with the previous 3 books. So if you want the book, and I highly recommend you get the book so that you're able to do assignments and everything, I would come up to the front office at the school anytime before 4 p.m., Monday through Friday, and come pick this book up. If you can't come up to the school and you don't have the time, I will be uploading videos of someone reading this book aloud on YouTube and always in the daily folders. Like I uploaded a link on the 324 folder, and there is going to be a link to, in the 325 folder as well. We've only gone through chapter 1 so far, but just do that. It's just the audio quality on that is not the greatest. But going forward, this book is about the civil rights movement, especially in the 1950s, and it's really focusing on one specific character in history, Claudette Colvin. She is a real person. She's still alive today. This book is a nonfiction book, so everything that you read about in this book is true. She was 15 years old. She sat on a bus. Someone told her to stand up and leave the seat. She declined, right? She did what Rosa Parks did 9 months before Rosa Parks even did it. She's the OG, the original. She is a huge spark in what evolved into the civil rights movement, right? So going into the welcome, I want you to think of the word social norm. We sort of went over that in the last play that we did, right? A Midsummer's Night's Dream. But in the last play, the social norms we were looking at involved gender, right? Some examples of social norms are the man is supposed to propose to the woman. The man is supposed to go out, get a job, and bring home money, and the woman's job is to cook and clean and take care of the kids, right? They're very outdated terms. They're social norms, they're traditions, customs that society thinks should be right, but now we know that they are sort of outdated. And the ones we were looking at, the social norms, again, had to do with gender. The social norms that we're looking at in this book, in this 9 weeks, are about race. So some of the social norms that we read about yesterday in chapter 1 is Claudette Colvin says that Black people were not allowed to touch white people. That's one of the social norms. Black and white people couldn't eat or play together. They couldn't even attend the same churches and couldn't even play in the same parks. The author writes that Black people were forbidden to marry one another, play on the same team, use the same swimming pool. And the buses had a lot of social norms. White people were allowed to sit in certain seats, and they could ask any person of color to stand up, and they could take their seats, right? That's what we're really going to be looking at today, are the buses and how awful the buses were, especially since, the main conflict is around Claudette Colvin and the bus and her refusing to give up her seat and her fighting for justice and standing up for what she believes is right. And right, that was a constitutional right. She didn't have to give up her bus seat. There is no law, and that's what we're going to get into today, right? And the main differences between the social norms of gender and the social norms of race is that, unlike social norms about gender, some of these social norms were actually city laws. So the city would actually pass laws that would segregate people of color a lot more than white people, and that's one of the words we went to yesterday was segregation. Segregation was the legal enforced separation of people or communities based on race, the color of their skin. And some of these norms or laws were called the Jim Crow laws. So some examples of the Jim Crow laws were separate water fountains for people of color and white people, separate movie theaters, separate swimming pools, separate schools. The schools are a big one, and the buses. Those are just some of the examples of the Jim Crow laws. And then we went into a Supreme Court case called Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka. And that was a Supreme Court law or passing judgment ruling that said that the segregation, the separation of schools based on race was illegal. And that had a lot of conflict into it. Claudette Colvin was one of the few students that decided to go to a predominantly or majority white school. And all of this is a snowball effect into the civil rights movement and what y'all probably know about Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, all of them, right? And I'm very excited to learn about this with y'all because this is such an important time in our in America's history, and I think it relates a lot to what's happening in America today. There's still a lot of racial tension, a lot of racial hate. And I think it's very important to learn how people fought against injustice, what they thought was wrong, and made a difference in this world, right? So moving on, why might it be important to understand Jim Crow in our study of Claudette? So the focusing question for this is what motivated Claudette Colvin, right? And one of the best motivators for Claudette Colvin in this book is the cruelty and unfairness and the ridiculousness of some of these Jim Crow laws, right? And a lot of those provided motivation for Claudette Colvin because why she decided to refuse to give up her seat was because she just had enough, right? And we have to fully understand the problems that people were facing before we can understand the ways that they created change and tried to solve them, right? You have to know what the problem is before you solve it. So it's important to understand just how bad and how restrictive the Jim Crow laws and how humiliating it was for some people and why they decided to fight against them and how they decided to create change. And it's also important to know the laws of the time to understand people's, especially Claudette Colvin's desire to change them, right? Their motivation. Let's go. The focusing question is against what motivated Claudette Colvin, and the content framing question for lesson 2 is what's happening in chapter 1. Right? And the goal is you're going to be able to express an understanding of the legal and social rules that govern life under Jim Crow. There were some legal rules, but most of them were social rules where they weren't actually laws, but it was happening for such a long time, they just became a habit for some people. So who was Jim Crow? This is the background on what Jim Crow and how they came up with the Jim Crow laws for the name. So between the 1830s and the 1950s, minstrel shows are they're shows or theaters where white people would make fun of other races, and they thought it was for a humorous effect, but it was terrible. And there's going to be a video example of a white actor performing the song that we're about to read about, and you'll see how bad it really is. But minstrel shows starred white performers who smeared burnt cork on their faces and ridiculed African-American life. Thomas Rice is credited with popularizing minstrel shows with the song Jump Jim Crow, which he said he'd heard from a black singer. After the song sold widely, Jim Crow became a standard in minstrel shows, then evolved into a term to represent the whole system of laws and customs that segregated black and white Americans. So the minstrel shows were basically these white actors doing blackface where they color themselves with burnt cork or charcoal to make themselves seem black. And it was just extremely racist. And Thomas Rice stole a song that he heard from a black singer called Jump Jim Crow, and they used it to make fun of the culture and the history behind that song. And it was basically the song Jim Crow is supposed to have been stolen from a black singer by a white one, right? And it sort of represents how the system of laws, the Jim Crow laws that came out during that time, the 1950s and 1940s, white Americans back then thought they could control, mock, and take things away from black Americans or any minority or any person of color, right? So it is such a restrictive point of view. And the fact that they named those set of restrictive laws after this hatred performance is really showing how much they wanted to belittle and dehumanize and mock Black Americans and other minorities, right? So this is the video. Again, just remember that you have to keep in mind this is a white performer. It gets very racist. He does it in blackface. So watch that if you want to. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. So who is Jim Crow? Continued. How does a character from a minstrel show represent the whole system of laws? Again, like I was talking about, white Americans back then that thought that you could control, mock, and take things away from Black Americans, and the fact that they named their set of laws after this shows how much they wanted to make fun of, dehumanize, bully other minorities, right? And how does gaining a deeper understanding of where this term came from develop your understanding of what the system of Jim Crow was like? You have to understand the background info of things to get a better knowledge and grasp on what is happening. Like at first, I thought these, whenever I learned it back in middle school, I thought these laws were just used to divide the races, right, to segregate. But whenever when I was first learning about these in middle school, I understood the background knowledge. And now I see that they were also meant to mock and ridicule Black Americans. Jim Crow wasn't just about keeping people separate. It was about laughing at Black Americans suffering. So Jim Crow is even worse than I originally thought. Hopefully you think that it's worse than you originally thought too after knowing the background knowledge. Because it's really just making fun of and bullying, right? So you have to understand the times that they were living in, how oppressive it was, how bad it was, right? So the rules of the bus, here are some of the rules of the bus, right? If the entire white section was empty at the front of the bus, Black passengers alone had to get off and re-enter the bus through the back doors. The first 4 rows, the first 10 seats were reserved for white passengers only. If the 10 seats were filled, then the driver could order Black passengers in the middle to give up their seats and go to the back of the bus for newly boarding white passengers. And a lot of these were enforced by the bus drivers, right? These weren't even laws. They were customs, they were traditions that were passed down and became a habit. And the bus drivers were the ones in charge. That's why I want you to go and watch that video of chapter 1, because you see how oppressive these bus drivers were. There's an example of a Black passenger refusing to get off the bus unless he got his dime back as a refund. And the cops got called and the cops shot the passenger and no one got in trouble for that. It's absolutely outrageous. That's happening today as well, where cops are killing people in the streets and they're not getting in trouble, right? So it's still happening, but it was way worse back then. And the bus drivers back then had some police powers. They would always carry pistols with them. They could do whatever they wanted to the Black passengers and they really wouldn't get in trouble because this was the South. This was Montgomery, Alabama. It's where this book is taking place. That is the Deep South. A lot of what happened in the civil rights movement did take place in Montgomery, Alabama, right? That is where Claudette Colvin is living. This is the setting, right? I need you to understand just how oppressive the system was and how people enforced these set of supposed rules. So why is the bus so important to understanding Jim Crow? The bus back then, people had no choice but to ride the bus. A lot of people didn't have cars. So they were forced to endure these cruel Jim Crow rules because they had to take the bus. And if they didn't listen to the rules, they would get beat up, jumped, harassed, arrested, and even worse, shot and killed, right? So they had to endure, and it was frustrating and absurd for them, right? And the bus was a site of a lot of violence against against Black people by white people, right? And Claudette Colvin, right? She had enough. Rosa Parks had enough, and they decide it's time to fight, right? Research questions. I'm going to go over this at another time, but just know your end of module task is going to be writing a research paper. And a research question is what your research paper is basically going over. It's a question that you're going to answer in that paper. And a research question can't be too broad or can't be too specific where you can answer it immediately. It has to be broad, it has to be general. So a good research question would be, who was Claudette Colvin and what was she like? You couldn't just Google that and click on one website and find the answer to that, right? You will need a good amount of research. This is also an interview about Claudette Colvin that was done recently. She's still alive. I think she's in her 80s right now. I would highly recommend watching this. It's called The Original Rosa Parks. Great interview. So go do that, and also read chapter 1, right? But that is basically it for chapter or lesson 2. Please go back and watch the lesson video in the 324 folder, and come up to the school to get the book. There is a discussion assignment that I uploaded yesterday. Please go do that. And if you have any questions, email me or message me on Schoology. But other than that, that is it for this lesson video, and I'll see you here for the next one. Bye.